So there's this girl that's sitting in this car on this bumpy road. Her parents are about to ship her off to her uncle's for 2 weeks. So as she's driving there, she gets there and notices that the barn looks horrible. It's just falling apart. She doesn't pay too much mind to it. So after she says goodbye to her parents, the usual I love you stuff, she comes in and meets her uncle. He walks to her and he's smoking a cigar and just looks very grumpy. And she realizes what she's going to be in for 2 weeks. But she decides to make the most of it. So her uncle, what he does for a living is he cuts off the heads of chickens like a butcher. And you know the saying, right? Chickens, like running around with a chicken with their head cut off. Well, this is a literal thing. So even after their heads are cut off, they're still running around like crazy before they eventually die, running all over the place. And the girl's looking at that and she's horrified. Later on that night, as they're eating, they have chicken naturally. And so before she goes to bed, her uncle warns her, the only rule I want you to follow is that you must sleep throughout the night. Do not wake up. You have to sleep throughout the night. She agrees to this and is off to bed, and as she's sleeping, she happens to wake up at about 2 or 3 in the morning. But she remembers what her uncle says, and she tries not to wake up, but she keeps hearing chickens bark. But she keeps thinking, no, my uncle told me not to do this. I can't wake up. She breaks his rule and she peeks her eyes open and she sees chicken heads floating around. And they just keep on barking at her. Bark, bark, bark. And she is just so horrified. She's never seen anything like this in her entire life. And she wishes she had never seen it. She pushes the blanket right over her head and tries to act like it was a dream. And when she wakes up in the morning finally, she doesn't see any of them, and she decides not to tell her uncle so that he won't be upset that she disobeyed his rule. So her uncle is busy working in the morning. She happens to notice these large bins that are full of the chicken heads. So he's just explaining the process to her about how he throws the chicken heads into the containers. Then suddenly she changed the subject and asked about his wife. However, the uncle is not trying to talk about that and instead gets back to his work. She thought it was weird that he deflected that, but didn't pay any mind to it really. So then as she's going to sleep at night, for the second night in a row, she wants to wake up. She keeps hearing this sound that she can't shake. She can't shake the feeling of it. And so once she wakes up again, she sees these chicken heads floating around, and this time they're bloody, and they keep barking at her too. They just keep bark, bark, bark. She can just hear them. And she is even more horrified, and she's trying to put the blanket over her head yet again to just escape the horror of it all. And when she wakes up in the morning, her heart is just pounding. And she hurries up and gets dressed and goes into the house, and she smells the horribleness of the dead chickens. And she's looking for something. And she stumbles upon a drawer and opens it up, and she notices a folder. And in the folder, she realizes her uncle did have a wife a long time ago. And the wife, she was into voodoo. For those of you who don't know voodoo, an example might be like someone sticking a doll or sticking a needle into a doll. And so she realizes that the wife was into that. But before she can get any further along, her uncle walks in and yells at her for being in there, and she apologizes, but he kicks her out. And even though she's upset that she got kicked out, she keeps thinking, that's really strange. My uncle had a wife and she's suddenly gone. How did she disappear? So she questions that a little bit, but then moves along. Startled by it, she still keeps thinking, I wonder what my uncle did with her. So at night, for the third night in a row, she's trying to sleep and her heart is just pounding. She thinks it might happen again. She might see the floating chicken heads, but she's not sure. And so during that night, she's not hearing any of the barking. Instead, she starts to feel her bed vibrating. When she opens her eyes this time for the third time in a row, she's fighting it. She gives in. Instead of seeing the floating chicken heads, she sees this woman, and she is covered in feathers, and she's bloody, and she's walking as if she's a zombie towards her, and she's just pursuing her. And so the girl has had enough. She is terrified. She runs out of there as the woman is following her. She runs like she's crazy. She goes to her uncle's bedroom and she wakes him up and says, "Uncle, get up. There's this woman who's naked with feathers all over her and she's bloody. Do something, Uncle." So he takes out his shotgun and the girl is just staring at the whole thing. The uncle is trying to shoot her, and after he lets off a couple shots, the uncle suddenly drops dead. But the naked chicken lady, she's still alive and she's still running after the girl. So she runs all the way into the barn and she's still there. The little girl is just terrified. She doesn't know what to do, and she smells all the dead animals in there. And she remembers that her uncle was she remembers that her uncle's wife was into voodoo. And so she's thinking maybe that's why this lady is following me, this spirit is following me. And she looks at the picture and she realizes that the lady that she's seeing now is her uncle's wife and that he killed her, but now her spirit is haunting her. Her soul is still trapped here. And so she puts the pieces together and she's screaming and she's scared, but she's in the barn and she decides that she needs to set it ablaze. That's the only thing that's going to take care of it. And she sees that it works finally. The woman is finally at peace and has left her alone. And so just when she thought she had had enough, she looks over and a chicken stumbles upon her.